the U.S. economy created 165,000 jobs in April and pushed the unemployment rate to its lowest level since late 2008. And here to discuss the latest job numbers is Washington Post financial reporter Ylan Mui. And Ms. Mui, tell us about the reaction you saw yesterday from Washington and Wall Street on these numbers. Are they about what folks were expecting?
Well, actually, they were significantly better than people were expecting, and I think there was really a lot of relief around these numbers, because what we've seen is that some of the economic data over the past month has come in a little weaker than people wanted to see. Certainly, the March jobs number originally was said to be 88,000 jobs created in the month of March, and that certainly is nowhere near the level that we need in order to see the recovery really take off.
And that number causing a lot of concern at that time.
Exactly. So the numbers that we saw yesterday that the Labor Department released really were a sign that the recovery is still chugging along. You know, it's still sort of going along, but even though it's not at the level that we would like to see it at yet. So what we saw yesterday was not only were 165,000 jobs created in the month of April, but the Labor Department also revised its figures for the previous 2 months, and that was just as important as the increase in April. February jobs were now over 330,000 jobs created. In the month of March, that 88,000 number that so many people were worried about is now looking to be 138,000. So again, significantly higher, and a sign that the recovery is still plugging along.
I want to dig into these numbers, but also looking at the reaction. Here's a blog post yesterday from Alan Krueger. He's the chairman of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. He writes, while more work remains to be done, today's employment report provides further evidence that the U.S. economy is continuing to recover from the worst downturn since the Great Depression. He goes on to note that as the administration stresses every month, the monthly employment and unemployment figures can be volatile, and payroll employment estimates can be subject to substantial revision. Therefore, it is important not to read too much into any one monthly report, and it is informative to consider each report in the context of other data that are becoming available. So give us the, Krueger encourages us to look at the sort of longer term picture. Give us how this hashes with everything else that we've seen over the past couple of years.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things here. One, obviously, these are 1 month's numbers. The Labor Department releases them as an estimate. They get revised several times, not just once but twice. So that's always a caveat. That said, the number that comes out every month, the first Friday of every month, is still a hugely important number, both politically and for the economy. Major decisions are made on what that number looks like it's going to be. So, you know, there's sort of two sides of that coin. When you look at the long-term picture, though, for where jobs are going, right now we're in a spot where things are actually looking a little bit better. Since the beginning of the year, you've seen job growth of about 200,000 per month, averaging 200,000 per month. And that 200,000 barrier is really important, because that's the number that needs to be created in order to see significant reductions in the unemployment rate, and also to sort of make sure that the recovery will be able to one day be self-sustaining. So that 200,000 a month figure is really important. Major decisions, again, are being made on what that average is.
And here's a chart that Krueger provided along with his blog post showing private sector payroll employment starting from 2008 through today. The big change here going from jobs lost to jobs gains coming in the spring of 2010. Talk about the idea of a spring slump. It's something we heard a bit about, concern after those March numbers. What is a spring slump, and what have we seen in past years?
So the spring swoon is something that economists use to refer to this idea that there was a lot of momentum that seems to build up in the economy over the winter that dissipates by the time that spring arrives. And this is a pattern that we've seen in the jobs data over the past 2 years. You know, you see a lot of activity, you see construction going strong, you might see manufacturing going strong, but somehow something happens when you get to, you know, March, April, May, where those numbers start to decline again. And so we thought that we were in that same pattern again this year. But when we saw the March numbers come out, people said, oh, well, this could certainly be indicative of the fact that the economy is once again slowing down. In addition to the March data, you also sort of had the threat of the sequester looming ahead, and folks saying, well, you know, this is certainly going to slow the economy. Are we back in the same pattern? Yesterday's data seems to dispel that notion and seems to sort of show that the private sector can actually shake off any headwinds that are coming from Washington.
Well, we want to get your sense on the job situation where you are around the country. We've separated our phone lines a bit differently in this segment. If you're employed, give us a call, 202-585-3880. Want to hear about your situation, your reaction to this job report. Unemployed line, 202-585-3881. And if you've stopped looking for work at this point, 202-585-3882. Those numbers are up on the screen and the phone lines are open now. We really want to hear about what you're seeing around the country where you are. Here's the front page of the Wall Street Journal again. The subhead, investors send Dow to record high as unemployment rate falls to lowest level since December '08. Talk about the market reaction and the reaction on Wall Street.
Well, markets were certainly ebullient yesterday. I mean, we saw significant rises in both the Dow and the S&P very shortly after the markets opened. The Dow actually went above the psychological barrier of 15,000 for the first time. It closed a little bit below that, but this close was still at a record high, and in fact, the Dow has closed at a record high 15 times so far this year. So you're certainly seeing investors cheering this news. Again, markets frequently trade on expectations. So even though the number is 165, we wouldn't normally be cheering a 165 number in terms of job growth, because it was better than people expected, because the revisions were so significant. That's why you saw stock markets rally yesterday. The S&P also reached a record high, closed above 1,600 for the first time.
Well, each job sector has sort of its own story to tell. Pull out a few of those sectors. We'll show the numbers for you on the screen now. Some of the big gains, 73,000 jobs came in the professional business services sector. The leisure and hospitality sector saw 38,000 job gain. Retailers, 29,000. Healthcare industry up 19,000 jobs. One place that remained unchanged was manufacturing. So perhaps you can start in the manufacturing sector and tell us what's going on there.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, you've seen manufacturing actually be one of the bright spots of the recovery sort of earlier on. And the recovery's now been, what, 5 years, so it seems to have gone through several stages. So manufacturing was one sector that helped us early on. Now you're starting to see that sort of switch over to construction being one of the areas that is providing a lot of the job growth. April was an anomaly, though, because you saw manufacturing flatline, because you saw construction actually shed about 6,000 jobs. And so one of the concerns that folks have about the nature of this recovery is, what are the types of jobs that are coming back? You see professional services come back in a big way. Those tend to be sort of white-collar, higher-paying jobs. You saw the leisure and hospitality, the restaurant and bar sector come back. Those tend to be sort of lower paying jobs. So the big question is, what happens to jobs in the middle? Because of the rebound in the housing market, again, you've seen construction jobs return for the first time in a very long time, but again, that sort of job polarization, what's happening to jobs in the middle, what's happening to jobs on either end of the spectrum, is a big question for the economy going forward.
And we're taking your thoughts, and we want to see what's going on in your part of the country. We will start with Shemiski in Indianapolis, Indiana, on our unemployed line. Shemiski, thanks for joining us this morning.
How are you this morning?
Good. Tell us about your situation.
Well, I've been unemployed for maybe a year. I am in the, middle sector. I'd have customer service managerial experience. And it's just basically been like a dead still. I've tried to cross-train in different areas through the Work One different labor departments, and it's like a shortage of money for training and skills. And then there's the technology jobs, but there's really not any jobs for the middle, like what she was saying. There's not a whole lot of, it used to be jobs where I could go get a job for maybe $10 or $11 doing customer service. Those jobs are obsolete. So there's not a whole lot. There's either $7 or there's $25. There's no in-between here in Indiana at the moment.
Eli Mui, talk a little bit about that situation.
Yeah, so again, she sort of got to the idea of job polarization, sort of the job growth happening at the high end, high-paying end of the spectrum, high-paid, high-skilled end of the spectrum, and the low-paid, low-skilled end of the spectrum, not as much in the middle. Economists have really been debating what that means, whether or not our economy has somehow fundamentally changed, such that a lot of the jobs that we lost during the recession may not ever come back. And if the economy has changed in a structural way, the response to how we help workers, respond to that is going to be very different than if the problem is simply one of demand, simply one of, people aren't spending as much money. Once the economy gets going again, more workers will be able to find jobs. Is the problem cyclical, problem of demand, or is the problem structural, a problem of a skills mismatch? And it seems like this caller is saying that what she's feeling, experiencing, is a problem of a skills mismatch.
Let's go to Ray now from Aliquippa, Pennsylvania. Ray is retired. Ray, tell us about the situation you're seeing there in Pennsylvania.
Well, it's mediocre at best. The only thing that's providing jobs here is the gas drilling that's going on in the states, providing numerous jobs, which, again, this administration is against. But I want to ask this young lady something about this unemployment rate, 7.5%. Those people who have quit looking for work, they're dropped off that number. The people who are on disability now that number has doubled. There's almost 9 million people on disability. Those are unemployed. Those should be. Those are not included in the 7.5. All the new claims on welfare are not included in the 7.5. If you add those numbers up, and I don't care how this administration plays with the numbers, you have between 15 and 18% unemployment. They are unemployed. They are not contributing to the tax base of this country. They are like parasitic. They're drawing off of it, while regular Americans out here, all you want to do, and you're part of it. You support this administration, young lady. You want to raise taxes on those who are still working.
Well, Ray, Ilan Mui is a reporter with the Washington Post who studies these numbers and reports on them. So if you could explain a little bit more how these numbers are quantified and how they come up with these numbers.
Right. So first I'll say I do not support the administration. I am an economics reporter. But he's absolutely right when he talks about the real number of the unemployed. So the way the Labor Department measures the number of people who are out of work is sort of very technical. In order to be considered technically unemployed, you have to be out of a job and have to have looked for work within the past 4 weeks. So that is sort of a fuzzy measurement. Some folks may be unemployed, but maybe didn't look for work in the past 4 weeks, but might look for work in the next 4 weeks. So there's all these additional categories of folks who are marginally attached to the labor force, who are discouraged workers who want a job but have given up looking because they feel like there's nothing out there for them, that actually add to the larger ranks of the unemployed workforce. And so there has been a real issue with the number of people who are discouraged workers or who are, again, marginally attached to the labor force or who are long-term unemployed. And so when you start to add up all those things, the picture for unemployment becomes that much more grim. And those workers who are sort of on the edges of the labor force, those people are going to have the hardest time finding a job. And one of the concerns that economists have is that the longer time that you spend outside of the labor force, the longer it takes you to find a job, the more difficult it will be. Your skills deteriorate, your professional networks begin to deteriorate, and it becomes even harder to bring you back in and to make sure that you have productive work that you want to find.
I want to talk about employment targets or where the administration would like to be at this point, and bring that up because Jared Bernstein writes today in an op-ed in the New York Times for full employment. He says, though yesterday's employment numbers revealed a slowly improving job market, the jobless rate is still elevated at 7.5%. While the high jobless numbers are partly a legacy of the Great Recession, the fact is that our economy has generated too few jobs for most of the last 30 years and is likely to continue to do so. The only viable response is a return to an idea that once animated domestic policymaking, full employment. The notion that everyone who wants to work should be able to find a job, and if the market isn't up to the task, then the government must fill the gap. For decades in post-war America, the maintenance of full employment, defined as an unemployment rate below 5%, was enshrined in law beginning with the Employment Act of 1946 and revisited in 1978 in the Humphrey-Hawkins Act. It was a central goal of the Democratic Party, labor unions, and advocates of social and racial justice, and he writes, it usually worked. Talk about, has the Obama administration said where they want to get this employment rate to? The responsibility for achieving
full employment rests obviously with the administration. They would like to create jobs, et cetera. But it also rests with the Federal Reserve, and that's where you really have seen sort of unemployment targeting take place. I'll say a couple of things first about the idea of full employment. I don't think there's anyone in the world who would say we don't want to see full employment. We don't want people who want a job to have a job. The question really is, what is full employment? Where is that percentage? And that is hotly debated. It's unclear exactly what that number would be. Certainly, it's not zero. There's always going to be people who are in transition, who are not in the labor force, who are coming in and out. But what is that number? Is it 5%? That's extraordinarily low to some economists. Is it 5.5%? Is it 6%? There's a big debate going on about that, and the Federal Reserve has set its unemployment target at 6.5%. That's the number at which it will say it will keep interest rates low until the economy hits at least 6.5% unemployment. It may keep rates lower for longer than that, but it will at least keep rates low until that number, because it feels like at that level you might start to see some sort of self-sustaining virtuous cycle of recovery.
A few tweets coming in on this subject. Wild and Wonderful writes, the recovery is sluggish, but the addition of even one job is better than the loss of 800,000. Want to go back to the phones. Leanna is waiting from St. Petersburg, Florida. Leanna is on our unemployed line. Good morning, Leanna.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. Tell us about your situation.
Well, first of all, let me say what the last caller said about people on disability being parasites. I totally resent that. I'm on SSI. All I get is Medicaid. It's not enough, you know. I'm an American citizen. I've grown up in St. Pete all my life. But back to what I really wanted to say is everybody who votes or wants to vote knows that all the government has to do is lower their own salaries, take cuts in their own salary, and then the poor and the homeless and the hungry won't suffer from not having enough. You know what I mean?
You think that's going to help you find a job in your situation, or what do you think would help you get?
I would love to be able to have a job, but I have health issues that make it really hard. I have a thyroid problem. It's a very slow thyroid, and I have chronic fatigue. But the doctors that we have here in Florida that accept Medicaid, they're the bottom of the barrel.
And Leanna, are you on long-term unemployed at this point in time?
Oh yes, but it's not as good as Medicare. That's the problem.
Eli Marie, I want to talk about the long-term unemployment number. In April, that number declined by 258,000 to 4.4 million. This according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics report that came out. Their share of unemployment declined 2.2 percentage points to 37.4%. Interpret those numbers for us.
Well, they're good. It's a good thing that there are more people who are sort of coming out of the long-term unemployed. The hope is that those people are no longer long-term unemployed because they're actually finding jobs, as opposed to dropping out of the labor force entirely. So the idea is that, you know, as the recovery picks up steam, hopefully the recovery will pick up steam, that it will start to bring in some of these other people from the labor force, sort of bring the people who've been waiting in line the longest in order to find a job. So that is an encouraging number. The number of discouraged workers, the number of people who sort of have given up looking for work, also fell. So that's an encouraging sign. However, as always in this economy, you get mixed signals, you get mixed results. We also saw the number of people who are working part-time for economic reasons. They'd like a full-time job, but you know all they can find is a part-time job. That number actually rose by about 250,000 in the month of April as well. So people may be finding jobs, but is it the job that they actually want?
Let's go to Arthur now from Bath, Indiana on our retired line. Arthur is retired. Good morning, Arthur.
Good morning, sir. You know, I think the discussion would be upgraded if we defined what a job is. And what we're talking about here is a lot of fractional jobs. A job isn't a job until it pays the bills, and just modestly pay the bills, and every free trade deal that we've made has undermined industry and labor in this country. And in order to fix this, we've got to fix this free trade thing to where we get a fair shake and not get the short end of the stick every time we make a free trade deal. And this is the crux of the matter. And in order to get a better pay, you've got to have skills and manufacture them. Now, through free trade, we farmed out every thing we have nearly, and it just doesn't work. And when is the government going to see that this is a futile idea and get back to standing up for the citizens? And every country in the world has gone down the tube. The workforce in every country is hurting because of this, and the rich people just soar.
On the issue of jobs overseas, Dee Fredericks writes in on Twitter, when you ship good jobs overseas quicker than new jobs can be created, it's hard to put people to work. We'll go to Gabriel now from Lehigh Acres in Florida on our employed line. Good morning, Gabriel.
Yes, good morning. My comment is that the unemployment rate by today, I think, would have been like 6.5 if our pardon my language, congressmen would work with the president. If we go back to our history, that's how we moved out of the Depression. In actuality, I believe we were in a depression. The thing is that lies were coming out of Washington. Our president has found the problems, have wanted to work on the problems, and the lack of will of our politicians in Congress is what has delayed all the numbers. But we're moving in the right direction. We're moving forward.
Ilan Mui of the Washington Post, can you talk a little bit about what's going on Capitol Hill to continue to try to push these job gains further?
Well, actually, the issue is that Washington is not pushing job gains further. In fact, they're reducing the number of jobs that we're seeing being created. So the caller brought up a really good point that we haven't talked about yet about the sort of tug of war between the public sector and the private sector. So what you found is that even though the public sector has been creating jobs, has been chugging along, Washington job cuts in the public sector have really been a drag on growth. So we saw, for example, in April, the number of employees in the public sector fell by 11,000. That was the 7th consecutive month of public sector job declines that we've seen. So even as you're seeing growth on one side, you're seeing the other side sort of take away that growth. In the meantime, you're also sort of facing the sequester and what the impact of that will be. What will those cuts look like for the workforce? They may come in the form of increased numbers of layoffs. It may come in the form of furloughs that decrease the number of hours that employees work. But any way you slice it, economists looking at this affecting growth during the year by about 0.5 percentage point. So that's something that is certainly significant. It is certainly a drag on the economy, and that's something that could delay that sort of a liftoff of the recovery until 2014. Are there expectations that have been made out there in terms of how much more loss we're going to see in the government sector because of sequester? It's a big gray area and big area of uncertainty. Really unclear. What we saw in terms of growth was that cuts to government spending had resulted in about 0.5 percentage point decline in growth during the first quarter. It brought down GDP during the fourth quarter of last year. So we clearly have seen the impact of government cuts on the economy. What is unclear is how significant, how large they will be going forward. It all depends on exactly how the sequester plays out. Let's go to Cheryl now from Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin, has stopped looking for work at this point. Cheryl, tell us about your situation and why.
Good morning. I became sick a few years ago, and I can't work. I'm not collecting Social Security because they keep saying no. So I'm in that process. My husband is working. He's a chef. He just recently went from making $14 an hour to the employer saying we have to cut wages. He makes $10.50 an hour now. The price of everything keeps going up. And then the Federal Reserve keeps monkeying around and printing more money, which makes the cost of everything go even higher. All the policies that they are coming up with, they're not helping us. They're helping the wealthy. Their income is up. But I think we're looking at a reset of how much people in America make, especially here in the middle of the country, not in Washington or New York. And I have no answer. Lord knows they're not going to listen to me. But, Elon, I'm wondering, you're a wonderful reporter, but do you ever actually leave the Washington, New York area and come out here in the middle of the country where I'm at, and wages aren't keeping up with actual cost of living? We've had to start using the credit card. God knows I don't want to.
Well, Elon, we let you talk a little bit about this wage issue.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I was just in Kansas City earlier this month, so I do get outside of Washington, and I do talk to people, and I will say that, you know, the issue of the long-term unemployed, the issue of wages is one that cannot be overstated for the country, and the issue of wages in particular is one that is frustrating, because what people are seeing again is that, we talked about earlier, even if you find a job, is it the job that you want? Is it the number of hours that you want? Is it at the wage that you want? So wage growth has been virtually non-existent for many different sectors and for many people, and that is an issue because consumer spending drives 2/3 of the economy. So if you're finding that folks aren't seeing their wages grow up, they aren't seeing incomes increase, you know, they're not going to be spending as much money in order to support the economy and support that demand. She also mentioned something that's important to talk about, which is the role of the Federal Reserve in all of this. We already mentioned that the Federal Reserve has targeted an unemployment rate of 6.5% for the time period in which it will keep interest rates low. It's also doing something else called quantitative easing, and by that means that it's buying bonds, $85 billion of bonds each month, in order to try to bring long-term interest rates down as well. The hope is, the idea is that will help increase demand for things like mortgages, and it will help increase business investment demand, and those things will support the economy. But the Fed has been criticized because the people who own houses, the people who are getting mortgages, are the people who tend to be better off. And so where does that leave the folks who, like the previous caller, are the ones who are sort of at the bottom rung, trying to make ends meet?
Let's go now to Madison, Indiana, on our unemployed line. Mike is waiting. Mike, thanks for calling in. Tell us about your situation.
Well, thanks for taking my call. Your show's great. I wish it was on a little later so more people could hear it. The previous caller, I agree with about Obama trying to ease unemployment. One of Obama's stances when he was running for office was to bring jobs back from overseas. And until those jobs come back, there aren't going to be any jobs. I'm unemployed right now. I'm drawing unemployment, thank God. It's not a lot, but it helps. I'm struggling to keep what I've got. And until the politicians get together, I mean, it seems like these guys couldn't legislate their way out of a paper bag right now. And people need to read up on ALEC, A-L-E-C, and that would kind of give them light on the Republican agenda. The caller who called in earlier, calling people drawing unemployment and drawing disability as parasites, you know, and the politicians calling it entitlements. You know, I've been paying into this stuff since I was a young man. I'm 58 now. So for all these people to say that they're entitlements, you know, it's kind of like things are backfiring on these politicians, and now it's time to pay up. And there's a lot of reasons, but you know, these guys have got to get together on the legislation.
Ylan Mui.
You know, what I think is interesting is that we've had a number of older callers call in and say, hey, I'm looking for a job, or hey, I have a job, I'm trying to work, would like more hours. One of the things that you're seeing in this recession and this recovery is that the number of people who are older workers has been increasing. You're finding that the people are working longer, partly because, for good reasons. One, they might be in better health. Medicine has allowed us to work longer than we used to be able to work, so that's a good thing. But people are also working longer because they're worried about their retirements. They're worried about you know, having enough money to last them through the final days. And so you're finding more folks who might be older, who are still looking for jobs, trying to still remain in the labor force, but finding it challenging because they are at a later point in their careers.
One other number from the Bureau of Labor Statistics jobs report that came out that wanted to ask you about is the average work week for employees, and what this really shows us here. It says that the average work week for all employees on private non-farm payrolls decreased by 0.2 hours in April to 34.4 hours, while manufacturing the work week decreased by 0.1 hours to 40.7 hours, and overtime declined by 0.1 hours to 3.3 hours. The average work week for production and non-supervisory employees on private non-farm payrolls decreased by 0.1 hour to 33.7 hours. Explain what we're measuring here and why we do that.
You know, what we're measuring is actually the length of the work week, and it is a helpful measure because sometimes folks might work longer than 40 hours a week. They may work a little bit less than 40 hours a week, and so down a smaller work week is not what we're looking for, is not the direction that we want to see things going in. And there could be a number of reasons behind that. One, again, could be the increase in part-time work that we're seeing. The other reason could be as employers look at their staff, look at their labor force, they say, we may not be seeing the demand that we would like right now, but instead of actually reducing the number of employees, we'll handle this by simply cutting the hours of the employees. So that, again, folks still have jobs. Are they working the number of hours they want? Are they in the types of jobs that they want? Again, this might be another area where you could see the sequester have an impact. If people are furloughed as opposed to being laid off, you may see that sort of manifest itself in that average work week number. So there's several different places and several different sort of details of the jobs report that you really need to look at in order to get a fuller picture of where the labor market is headed.
Ylan Mui is a reporter with the Washington Post. We're talking about the April jobs numbers. In April, the unemployment rate dropped to 7.5% with 165,000 jobs added last month. We're getting your thoughts and your take on your employment situation in the areas where you are. Let's go back to Ohio, to Dayton. Tom is on our employed line. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning. You know, all I can really say is look at Bangladesh, and we've got our corporations, our CEOs, probably Donald Trump, because I've seen him on the David Letterman show and saying, well, the people in Bangladesh need jobs. You know, they're going to charge that man with murder that own that building. We need to start charging our people, our investors, our CEOs that are contracting our jobs overseas. These free trade laws, you know.
And Tom, what are you seeing in Ohio? Talk about the employment picture going on your street and in your town.
Oh, well, you can get a job making $8, $9, $10 an hour, but that's not money. That's not money to live on. You can't put 3, 4, 5% in your 401. It's impossible. And he's talking about raising minimum wage to $9. You know, sir, I made $10 an hour 30 years ago. 30 years ago. And people out here are making what I did 30 years ago. And gasoline was 35 cents. A gallon of milk was 40 cents back then. This is absolutely our Congress, our Senate, and even the president's been bought off by money.
Ylan Mui, talk a little bit about what the caller brings up.
Yeah, I think that one thing that he mentioned that is interesting is, again, the issue of flat wages. That has been a problem. But several of the callers have also talked about prices. And so we've seen some factors of prices be very volatile. For example, gasoline prices. It seems like they're up one day, they're down the next day, they're back up the next day. So gasoline prices obviously have been very volatile. But overall, inflation has actually remained fairly tame over the past few years. Right now, it's actually trending at about 1.1%, which is one of the record lows. So prices have actually not overall increased that significantly. And the reason why that is important is because that allows the Federal Reserve to continue its policy. It has said that it will continue to buy bonds, to continue to pump money into the economy. It will continue to keep interest rates low unless inflation gets out of control. What is out of control inflation? Something like 2.5%. If they start to see inflation rise above that level, then they might start to pull on the brakes. But right now, because inflation is low, the Federal Reserve has seen it appropriate to actually continue its policy. Some members of the Fed have actually argued for increasing the level of stimulus in order to bring inflation up. We don't want to be in a cycle where we're actually in a deflationary environment and end up like Japan.
Alan is from St. Joseph, Missouri, has stopped looking. Alan, tell us your situation and why you stopped.
Well, thank you for taking my call. The first thing I would have to say, I got probably two things real quick, is that the number that they use for the unemployment is incorrect because the natural attrition rate is 150,000. So in order to create one job, the number has to be 150,001. Number two, the other problem is the illegal immigration. I'm in a local in Kansas City, Local 8, and we have adopted a discrimination policy of workers 50 and older in order to bring in undocumented workers into the unions for cheaper labor.
Well, there is an issue that he brings up around sort of, and another caller also sort of mentioned this as well, around sort of the gray economy. And that is work that is done by people that is not on the books, whether it be work that is done by people who are here illegally, whether it's work just done on the side, somebody mowing a lawn, making a few extra dollars. It is really hard to quantify the amount of activity that goes on sort of in this gray economy. But it's something that is clearly very important to people and an area in which you may see more people turning to as they find it difficult to have a formal job. Again, sort of going to the definition, what is a job? Is a job something that has benefits and a 401k or a pension plan, et cetera? Or is a job work that's cobbled together that allows you to make a living?
Let's break down these numbers even more. We'll turn the front page of the business section of the New York Times. College graduates fare well in the jobs market, even through the recession. The story notes that the unemployment rate for college graduates in April was a mere 3.9%, compared with 7.5% for the workforce as a whole, according to the statistics released yesterday. Even when the job slate for college graduates was at its very worst in this business cycle in November 2010, it was still just 5.1%. That is close to the jobless rate for the rest of the workforce, that the rest of the workforce experiences when the economy is good. Among all segments of workers sorted by an educational attainment, college graduates are the only group that has more people employed today than when the recession started. That's in the business section of the New York Times. Want to go back to the phones. Ruben is waiting from Kansas City, Missouri on our unemployed line. Good morning, Ruben.
Well, good morning. I want to say this first. If they call themselves patriots, I don't understand how they can be patriots when they ship jobs out of their own country into other countries. But I want to know this. Who is the overseers of fair employment? Because in the Afro-American community, the job rate is extremely high. Now, as the gentleman was stating from Missouri himself, I see now more Spanish-speaking people employed out there on job sites, construction jobs, street jobs, but I very seldom see African Americans working. It seems as though, it used to be a saying, we're the last people hired and the first people fired, and it seems to be that way now. Who oversees? Who does a number on who's working and how fair is the employment status?
Ruben, to give you some numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics report that came out yesterday, it does break it down by major working groups. It notes that the unemployment rate for whites in April was 6.7%, blacks 13.2%, Hispanics 9%. And those showed little or no change. The jobless rate for Asian workers was 5.1%, not seasonally adjusted, little changed from a year earlier. But I'll let you give some more context on those numbers.
Yeah, what you're seeing is that the recovery is very uneven, and so when you mention the unemployment rate for African Americans and for whites, unemployment for African Americans is more than double that for whites. And so when you again go into the guts of the report and look at the details of who's working, who's not, how long, how much, you'll find that there's a lot of unevenness, there's a lot of bumpiness in those numbers, and those numbers are real people, those numbers are real jobs. One issue for the African American community is not only are they grappling with higher unemployment, but they also have experienced a greater loss of wealth during the recession than other racial groups did. So you're actually finding that because so much of their wealth was driven by the housing market, so much of it was wrapped into their homes, that when home prices plunged, when the housing market collapsed, it had a disproportionate impact on African Americans. And so that's another thing that they're struggling with at the same time that they're seeing unemployment rates be disproportionately high as well.
I want to bring in James now from Ellenberg Center, New York, on our employed line. Good morning, James.
Good morning.
Go ahead.
Right now, Congressman Owens and Patrick Leahy are putting a bill into the immigration law that they say that there's a lack of labor on dairy farms. I got a fact that in 1988 there was 220,000 dairy farms in the United States, and in 2008 there was less than 35,000. At the same time, dairy production stayed flat or even increased slightly, which right there's a job loss. And according to the census, there's about three employees per farm. So, I mean, right there, you do the math.
Well, Ilan Mui, can you talk a little bit about farm jobs?
I have to admit that's not my area of expertise, but I think that what the caller speaks to is, again, this job polarization issue. You're seeing job growth cluster at the top end, high-skilled end of the spectrum, and at the low-skilled, low end of the spectrum. But again, some of these jobs in the middle are becoming harder and harder to come by.
Danny's from Lake Wales, Florida, has stopped looking for work at this point. Good morning, Danny.
Good morning.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just calling in. I live in a rural county. It's in central Florida. Basically, I'm 59 years old. Grew up with an agriculture-based economy in Florida, and we're really hit hard here. I hold 4 degrees. I have a master's in business administration. I haven't been able to find a job in this area for over the last 6 to 7 years. And there's $8 an hour jobs around, but that won't even pay for the gas. I just believe like a democracy will only continue to exist up until the time that the voters discover they can vote themselves a generous gift from the public treasury. From the moment on, a majority always votes for the candidate who promises the most. And to me, it just seems like, we just show so much complacency, and there really doesn't seem any policies, really substantial policies that's going to take us anywhere. It's just a bunch of theoretical discussion. And I believe we have to have more firmer policies and be willing to look at our democracy in a new way as this economy continue to change.
Danny from Lake Wales, Florida. I want to also get in Joe from Omaha, Nebraska on our employed line. Good morning, Joe.
Hello. Thanks for accepting my call. I have a couple comments and then a quick question about efficiency and the gang mentality. As far as efficiency goes, I'm recently employed. I was unemployed not too long ago. And basically what I mean by efficiency is I was getting assistance myself. Now, when you call in to speak to these people, it's all telemarketers where there used to be workers. I tried to get an address to the dentist office so I knew it would be covered under the health care plan. Well, they gave me the wrong address, so I went to this dentist office for no reason, had to go to another one. I needed to get my eyes checked. They sent me to the place that would check my eyes but wouldn't give me glasses. So, I mean, there's some efficiency issues there with the social programs anyways that is part of the problem. And what I mean by gang mentality, I'm trying to keep a calm tone, but I'm really disgusted with the gang mentality in Washington. It doesn't seem like Republican or Democrat has the best interest of our country at heart. They forgot that that's their primary goal, is supposed to look out for the country. A Democrat that might think something's good that falls outside of the parameters of Democratic policy is afraid to say it because he don't want to upset all his people.
Well, Joe, got to leave it there for you, but Ylan Mui, want to give you the last comment on this segment of the Washington Journal and sort of talk about the outlook for jobs in the coming months.
Well, the outlook is better than we thought it was going to be. The economy has more momentum headed into the sequester, headed into this sort of fiscal drag than we thought that it would. So that is good news. The bad news is that there's still a fiscal drag, and that that is still expected to weigh on the job market. It's still expected to weigh on the economy, and it's, again, pushing back this idea of a liftoff in the recovery. When things will really start sort of ramping up here, it pushes that idea back to 2014.
Ylan Mui is a financial reporter for the Washington Post. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.